Hi there, welcome to or welcome back to Tiffany's Books, where I read books and I talk to you about them. Putting my hair like this really makes me miss my shaved sides, and I'm debating doing that again because it's gonna be hot this summer. Anyway, I said I was gonna make notes for the Sword of Kaigen. I lied. We're gonna do it. I'm not gonna make the notes, although I don't know what order this videos are gonna come out in, so maybe you know that I didn't make the notes before I even said I was gonna go make notes. But I do have some highlights. So I finished the Sword of Kaigen recently and I was a little obsessed. I was also very overwhelmed. The Sword of Kaigen emotionally destroyed me on multiple occasions, and we're gonna talk about it kind of briefly because I don't want to go on forever because I have a habit of doing that. This is not going to be a 45-minute review, Tiffany. This is going to be short. Than 45 minutes. I will break this apart into two sections. Okay, so here is my non-spoiler review for the Sword of Kaigen. Go read it. Okay, thanks, bye. No, okay, I'm joking. I am over-caffeinated. So, Sword of Kaigen. We are following two main characters throughout most of this book. We're following Misaki and her son, Mamoru. Misaki is an interesting character. She is gotta be in her 30s, but she acts like she's like in her 50s. She's always like, oh, my old bones. But honestly, same. And I'm in my 30s. So I guess we're the same girl. We're not. She's way more badass than I am. So Misaki is a housewife in this land called Kaigen that is very much inspired by Japan, by like feudal Japan, I think, ish. Older traditional Japan. Women are housewives. Their role is to raise children and be seen and not heard, and to serve tea. That's mostly Misaki's things. It is unheard of for women to train or to touch swords. It is considered unclean. Women are kind of second-class citizens in this world. And all of the men in this land are, I can't remember the name of the city that they're in, Takiyubi? Maybe. Pronounced very badly. They are all warriors, and most of them are trained at this academy where Mamoru, who is Misaki's oldest son, is currently training. And he is extremely good at what he does, but he doesn't really believe he is because his dad is very much not the complimenting type. So let's talk a little bit about Mamoru. Mamoru is 14. He is training with sword. He is the son of the kind of like unofficial leader of the village / kind of official leader, the Mitsudas. Well, I guess, okay. He's the son of the second son of the Mitsuda dynasty, which is Takeru, and that's Misaki's husband. And let's see, how do we want to talk about this? In the beginning of the book, we start with Mamoru, and he has his world rocked in the beginning of the book. He has this new student who's from the larger world, and that is where we find out that our world is about to be very different than what we expected. Kaigen in specific is very much kept behind technologically, and the rest of the world is advanced. And while it seems like we're in a ancient past, we're not, because the rest of the world uses like digital communications and cell phones. It's literally just Kaigen that doesn't. So I was like, oh, not expecting that. And this boy, Chuli, he tells Mamoru that everything Mamoru has learned about the history of his world is wrong. And he's being told something wildly different and accuses it of being propaganda. And Mamoru gets really upset about this, and him and Chuli end up having a fight. And Mamoru kind of accidentally discovers that maybe Chuli is right. Maybe he is right. And Mamoru doesn't know how to reconcile that. And his mom ends up talking to him, Misaki. And Misaki has actually had a broader experience of the world than most housewives. And she feels very stifled by this world that she's been put into because her father allowed her to sword fight, and she went off to this international school, and she was able to learn even more about fighting, and she is a very strong fighter in her own right. And so she tells Mamoru that she's not going to tell him what is right or what is wrong in this scenario, but she is going to encourage him to listen because he could maybe learn something. And I loved this conversation a lot because she's trying to like walk this line of what can I do as a mother in a world that doesn't support women or women having these types of opinions, because she's like very well aware she's already been put down a few times by her husband Takeru's father when she first moved there, who physically abused her more than once. That's a little bit better. So she's trying to deal with that and like what is like allowed from her and what is she allowed to say and all of these things. And Mamoru is now like, I've never seen this side of my mother, but he's always respected her quietly. So in this world as well, we have elemental magic, and everyone in Kaigen has water and ice magic, which is pretty cool. And then there is an area that has air magic, and they are inspired a little bit by China. And then there's another area that has fire magic, and I believe, I can't remember what they're inspired by, but fire magic as well. Nobody has earth magic that I saw, but we do have some like elemental magic, which I think is always really interesting. And I find it fascinating how literal some of this can be, because Misaki's biggest issue with her husband is that he is extremely cold, like figuratively and literally. Like literally his body temperature is lower, and so are her son's body temperatures, because they have like absorbed him, like his essence is kind of how she believes it. She's like, there's so much of Takeru in them that they are also cold physically, and she doesn't like touching them because she doesn't want to be cold. She wants to be warm. But she herself is also cold because she is also a water ice person, right? But her family is better with water and more adept to water and actually blood magic. Hello, Katara, and your blood bending. But she's a little like more geared towards that than her husband is with ice and snow, and her sons tend to be more towards that, but also it's seen because blood magic is a little dirty. And ice is pure, and so there we have a lot of these types of things. Kind of, it can be very literal in a lot of ways. I didn't mind it necessarily how literal it was. I most of the time don't mind it when a book is really literal. I just don't like when they hold my hand, but I don't mind very literal language. So Takeru is very cold and frigid, and Misaki hates that about him, along with his controllingness and his anger and his he's not like outright anger, but he kind of just blocks, and she hates that even more. She has tried to make herself comfortable by making friends with her sister-in-law, Setsuko, I believe, Setsuko, and her neighbor Hiyori. And these are like the two women that she's kind of brought into herself, and they both have very different personalities. Hiyori is very mild and she's very naive, and Setsuko is very like loud and boisterous and just kind of friendly. And she's from a fishing village. She's not from these like noble, wealthy families, and so she doesn't have as much of these rules as Misaki was raised with, and especially that Hiyori was raised with, because Misaki at least was able to like go out and expand her worldview, and Hiyori has always been kept very like constrained. And Misaki has made friends with these two women because Hiyori's family that she married into is also like up there. I can't remember their last name, but she's like very up there, right against her husband's family. So that's kind of the dynamic we have. And we have these three women like constantly supporting each other and trying to raise their kids in this world that is like not supportive of them as women. And Setsuko got lucky. She got to marry for love. Takeshi, Takeru's brother, saw her one day and just was like, I need her. I fell in love with her. And because his father had died, he wasn't told who he had to marry. He got to choose this woman. And so they kind of have a very different dynamic than Misaki and Takeru do, and who were kind of forced together. And I believe Takeru is like 10 or 15 years older than Misaki as well. So there's kind of that at play. So that is the gist of what we know going in. This is a very long book. This is like a 650 page book. So what eventually we learned that there is this propaganda happening, and it is because the emperor wants to keep Takayubi as its kind of, Chuli calls them cannon fodder, but they also want to keep this part of the country from knowing that a war could come, so that they're ready to defend. They're one of the great old warrior houses. I think essentially the only thing I can really say without spoiling is that we're going into this with what do we do with propaganda and what do we do when we're faced with a task that seems impossible and even the government is like against us succeeding, and how do we break norms and expectations and thrive in a world that we didn't expect to thrive in? And how do you manage who you are when you feel that you have been caged and not able to be who you are? And what kind of effect does that have on you as a whole? And I think this does that really, really well. I've said a couple times before that I do think M.L. Wong has grown exponentially between this book and Blood Over Brighthaven. And A Blood Over Brighthaven does a lot of these things, but does them much more nuanced, I think, than this one, where this can be a little heavy-handed at times, and I didn't mind that. I thought it was fine. I think there's just some like parts of it that I wish that we had pushed back on a little bit more in some areas. Some of the sexism and misogyny kind of keeps bleeding through. There's a little bit of mild homophobia from Misaki later on, because it's supposed to I get that it is supposed to mirror the way that she was raised, because another character is like, oh, come on, are you really going to be that way? And she's like, oh, good point. So that gets pushed back on a little bit, but some of the other stuff kind of doesn't. Some of the like, you're a man, act like a man consistently like ekes through. And I think there's not as much of that in Blood Over Brighthaven, and I think that's part of just growing as a person. Like, I definitely was guilty of that in my 20s, of being like, come on, you're a man, act like it, and now I'm like, no, that's dumb. Like, why do we say these things in a society? And that's just part of growing and learning and stuff, and I think the book definitely balances that pretty well. It really does show that, like, Misaki's vision of strength is entirely wrong in a lot of ways, but it doesn't, like, push back on it enough in some places, I think, where she continues to have that language. Some content warnings I want to give you before I get into the spoilers. I'm not going to like describe these things in detail, but this will be the very end of the spoiler-free review, and then I will do some spoilers, okay? So, if you have made it this far, give this a like, please. I really appreciate it. Let me know in the comments if you've read this or any comments you have on it. And I appreciate it, and I will see you next time if you don't want to stay for the spoilers. Content warnings are, there is loss of a child, there is lots of blood, there is a sexual assault, there is a suicide, there is miscarriage and abuse following the miscarriage, like being blamed for the miscarriage. There's a lot of emotional responses around that. There is depictions of pregnancy. There is a pregnancy from a sexual assault as well. And there are some pretty brutal deaths. There is verbal and physical abuse of a parent to a child, and also domestic as well. So those things are in here, and if any of those things are too hard for you, I wouldn't recommend this book, because it deals with a lot of those things as well, on top of all the other things. So, some spoilers. So the pacing of this book is very weird. These are big spoilers, by the way. Like, this is a big spoiler, okay? Around the 35, no, what percent was it? Hold on, let me look. Around the 42% mark, Mamoru dies. He gets brutally murdered. Around 42%. That's when the war comes. The war happens at 42%, and I was like, what the fuck are we gonna do with the rest of this book? What are we gonna do with the rest of this book? ML, what are you gonna do to me? A lot. She was gonna do a lot to me. So we get Misaki having to deal with the grief of losing her son. And it wasn't the death of him that like got me sobbing. It was the women supporting her in it and how they were like, they rallied around her. And then the other parts was like Hiyori gets sexually assaulted during the attack. And then she's like blaming herself for it constantly. And like, it turns out to not be her husband's kid either, because she's like, it could be either one. And so when she finds out it's not, she like swords herself, like after trying to kill the baby too. And so Misaki is like, no, that was Hiyori's last wish, is to not have that baby die. I will protect that baby. That is now my baby. I am claiming it for like us. It will be our baby, our village baby. And yeah, so I mean, that was like, that was a lot. The other thing, so we get a lot of Misaki's backstory, which I think is great. We get to see her in her prime, her belief of her prime, and she's like 19 years old, crime fighting, being an avenger, and she always views herself as a monster because she's willing to kill for her friends and for her family. Like, for people that she loves, she is willing to cross that line if needed. She never does until that war where she killed 7 of these like really powerful fighters after not training forever. And Setsuko was like, holy shit, Misaki, you're a beast. What the fuck? Like, what have you been hiding? And which I was like, I love you, Setsuko. Thank you for saying that to her. Like, somebody needed to say that to her. And eventually, because the way that their culture is, if you don't properly say goodbye to people who've died, they can come back as ghosts. And so she says her goodbyes to her son. And then she starts seeing his ghost. His ghost starts haunting her and her like next youngest son. Or she has 4 sons. So her 3rd youngest son. They start seeing him. And she thinks it's her fault, and she's like, I didn't say it properly enough. I was a bad mother. I wasn't good enough. And it turns out it was Takeru who hadn't been able to let go of the fact that he made a choice that he views as the wrong choice. And this is where I hated Takeru for a long time. He never fully got my forgiveness, but I could see he was earning Misaki's forgiveness. He was never physically abusive to her, but he was very verbally like degrading and emotionally abusive. He was distant, he was neglectful, but he used all that as an excuse of like, he could see she didn't want to be there, so he was trying to not like be around her or be in her space. He was trying to give her space. He was trying to just do like the minimum that was required of their relationship by like societal expectations so that she could just be herself, instead of trying to like ever earn her respect. Or have an actual relationship. And that, she's like, that was the worst part for me. But she ends up calling him out, and that's how she finds all this out. She like challenges him to a fight and makes him like fight her, because initially he shows up and he's like, you're right, I did this wrong and I did this wrong and I did this wrong, just fucking kill me. And it like bows to her sword, and she's like, no, you're gonna fight me like a man. And that's where I said some of like the like a man thing like really started to get to me a little bit. And so she like makes him fight her, and they have this like epic argument with like swords and shit. And she's like, if you're gonna be my husband, be my husband. Like, we're gonna have conversations, we're gonna have tough communication, we are going to do things together, but we are going to do them together. And I was like, I appreciate that. Like, yes, like communicate. Finally, it only took you like 20 years of marriage or however long it has been, 15 I think. Like, come on, you're adults. And so it was kind of nice to see that. And then he like submitted to her and was like, he gave her the last chance. Like, he fought her hard and then gave her a chance, like offered his neck, and she stopped her blade. And so like basically he was like, is she actually going to kill me, or are we going to trust each other? And I was like, I do kind of like that. And he explained a lot of his like issues and stuff with his father being extremely abusive to him and all of the things that he did to avoid that. And he would literally like become the mountain, and he would just disperse all of his like energy into the mountain so that the mountain would take away his pain. And I was like, as a child who had a rough relationship with their parents and dealt with some shit, the descriptions of disassociating like that, or dissociating, I think dissociating is the proper word, but they were very emotional for me to have to hear and deal with. And I think they were done very well. And so some of that I was like, yes, let's give him like an arc. And he did like kind of try to do some things. He tried to like earn her trust back, but obviously it wasn't enough because it was a very short amount of time. And she even says that in a line. She's like, none of our stuff is going to be fixed in like a moment or because of one fight. It's going to be work, and it's going to be work. And I appreciated that a lot, that we were like doing that, and that he got he wasn't just like, it wasn't just man bad. Like, and it also wasn't like he had a traumatic experience, so therefore we're going to give him a pass. She was like, no, you're going to work to be better, and you're going to let these things go because you have children, and you're going to be a better father to your children than your father was to you. And I was like, yes. Like, there was no like excuses. She was like, no excuses. Be better and do better. And you've just fought me. Now fight that. And I was like, yes. Ideal. Like, honestly, that whole thing was good. Like I said, there was a little bit of like the be a man thing that I was like, ugh. But overall, a well done like communication scene. So there was a line right before that, because he's like feeling very emotional over the fact that he had like, one of the last conversations he had with his son was to like accuse him of being weak, and then his son died in battle, right? And so there's this line that says, Takeru had demanded that Mamoru stand and fight for his truth. Now that his wife was asking him to stand, all he could do was shatter and shatter and shatter. And I was just like, oh, yes. Because again, the ice metaphors, right? So I was like, yes, that is such a good line. There was one, she had given him her whole life and demanded nothing in return, because he starts to realize like everything that she's done, like everything that she has done that society asked of her, that his family asked of her, and how he had never given her anything back for that. Like, he'd never done anything for her. He'd never even acknowledged her, like barely acknowledged her. And he like was admitting to himself, not out loud enough, but he was admitting to himself all of the terrible things that he'd done just by not being there for her, and just by letting her feel like she was alone. And I was like, oh, okay, we love when someone acknowledges their mistakes and realizes they need to change them. And then there was this line, it was like, Takeru stared at the woman he had married and saw her for the first time. And I was like, okay, yes, I get what we're doing. And then I was 75% in, and I was like, what is happening now? What is going to happen now? So what he does is he contacts her like high school love interest and invites him over, and then we find out he's had a baby and his wife has died, and like all of these other people that Misaki knew have like died, and they've been fighting this whole other war outside of this whole thing. And because there was this assassin, there's a mosquito in my house, there was this assassin at the last minute who like showed up to try to like blow up Takeru and Misaki, and then we don't get to know anything about that, because Emma Long was like, yeah, I'm not writing this as a series anymore, sorry, bye. Because it was connected to her like Theonite series that was like a YA kind of series, and so this was all connected to that, and she was like, sorry, I can't do it anymore. It sounded like she kind of wrote herself into a corner, and she was like, I'm discontinuing them and I'm pulling them, I just can't, sorry. So I'm like, but what about the assassin? Like, what was he about? So there's this whole last like 150 pages where I was like, we could probably cut this. But some of it was very much needed, because Takeru was like, I invited him because I trust you. Like, I trust you that you have made this commitment to me, and I need to be more trusting of you because you are smarter than I thought. You are more dedicated than I thought. You are more like competent than I thought. Like, you are more than I thought. And I was just like, okay. The fact that we could leave the book knowing that he was continuing to work to improve, I could get behind. And I really liked that. I thought that was a really well done way to like end it, even though I felt like a lot of it was unnecessary because we're not getting more of the story. But like, I mean, she didn't know that when she was writing it, so fair. But I do want to know, I'm like, who was the assassin? Where was he from? Like, did Robin really get blood puppeted? Like, by who? Who was this really powerful Theonite? I need to know. So, Yeah, that was kind of frustrating. That's why I said soft 5. There's some things about it that I was like, this could be a little bit better, but overall, like, I think it was a really well done story, and I'm really happy with it. I'm glad I finally read it, and I can see why everyone is like obsessed with it and why it is done so well. And I want this much love for Blood Over Brighthaven, because Blood Over Brighthaven is like, it's so good. It's so good. Anyway, that is my short review, because there is a lot more I could probably say, but I would really need to plan it out, and I didn't plan any of this out. So those are my like big things that are like pressing on my brain, is the loss, the grief and loss, and the way that we deal with grief and loss in this book, and then the way that we deal with relationships and communication and friendships and family. It's just so good. The like family friendship between Misaki and Setsuko is like, it is peak. I love it. I absolutely love it. I love women supporting women, especially when they're supporting women's wrongs. I just love it. And like, Misaki is such a badass. Like, she just, yeah, I really appreciated it. So anyway, that is my review. If you liked this, then please like it. If you want to hear me gush about something else that you know I've read, tell me what you want to hear me gush about. I will probably do a Burning Kingdoms one soon, because that was, again, emotions. So I will see you soon with something else.